If you were to stand on the banks of the Dnieper River in what is now Ukraine 15,000 years ago, you would be standing on a different planet. There is no green grass. There are no forests. There is only the Mammoth steppe, a vast, endless ocean of permafrost, dry grass, and ice that stretches from France to Alaska. The silence here is terrifying. It is a silence so deep you can hear the blood rushing in your own ears. But the silence is deceptive. It is merely the pause before the wind. When the wind comes here, it does not blow. It scours. It rushes down from the massive Scandinavian ice sheet to the north, creating a katabatic gale, a river of gravity-driven air that freezes flesh in minutes. You are a hunter-gatherer in the late Pleistocene. You have fire, you have furs, you have spears, but you have a problem that seems insurmountable. To survive the winter, where temperatures drop to 40 degrees below zero and stay there for months, you need a shelter. You need walls to stop the wind and a roof to hold the heat. In every other environment on Earth, humans solve this with wood. You cut down a tree, you build a frame, you survive. But look around you. There are no trees, not one. The landscape is a flat, frozen wasteland. You cannot dig a cave because the ground is frozen solid as granite. You cannot build an igloo because the snow is too dry and powdery, whipped away by the wind before it can settle. You are standing in the middle of the deadliest winter on Earth, completely exposed, with no building materials. By all the laws of survival, you should be dead. Yet, archaeology tells us that people did not just survive here, they thrived. They didn't hide in holes. They built massive, complex architectural masterpieces. They built castles. But to do it, they had to embrace a paradox that defies modern sensibilities. They had to realize that the only way to sustain life was to surround themselves, quite literally, with death. They had to look at the massive, bleach-white skeletons of the fallen megafauna littering the plains and see not a graveyard, but a lumberyard. To appreciate the engineering of the Mammoth bone house, you must first respect the sheer brutality of the environment. The enemy here is the wind chill. In the Ice Age, the global temperature was lower, but the local climate in the Ukraine region was defined by its dryness. This was a cold desert. The lack of moisture meant there were no clouds to trap the Earth's heat. At night, the heat radiated straight out into space. A calm night might be -30. A windy night was lethal. The predator was not just the cold, it was the biological competition. Cave lions and wolves roamed these plains. A flimsy tent made of skin stretched over willow scrub, if you could even find it, offered no protection against a 500-pound cat. A tent offers no thermal mass. You build a fire inside, the front of your body burns and your back freezes. When the fire dies, the temperature inside matches the outside instantly. Modern bushcraft solutions fail here. You cannot make a debris hut because there is no debris. You cannot make a log cabin. The prehistoric humans of the Mezhyrich and Mammoth settlements were facing an architectural crisis. They needed a structure that could withstand hurricane-force winds, hold a heavy snow load, insulate against Arctic cold, and repel predators, all without a single beam of timber. They needed a material with high compressive strength, something that could be interlocked, something heavy enough to anchor itself to the frozen earth. They looked at the woolly mammoth. This was an animal that weighed 6 tons. Its bones were evolved to support immense weight. Imagine the first struggle. Before the great bone houses were perfected, there must have been years, perhaps generations, of desperate failure. You can imagine a family trying to prop up a heavy reindeer hide using the ribs of smaller animals or fragile scavenged branches. The wind begins to howl, a low vibration that you feel in your chest before you hear it. The structure starts to shake. The sensory experience of a failed shelter is traumatic. The sound of the wind flapping the loose hide is deafening, like a gunshot cracking over and over. Then, the support snaps. The roof collapses. You are buried not in snow, but in the freezing canvas of the hide, pinned down while the heat is sucked out of you. The smell of fear, of wet fur, of the extinguishing fire. They likely tried piling stones, but the stones on the step are small and scattered. Piling turf or sod was impossible because the ground was permafrost. You couldn't cut it into blocks. It was like chipping at concrete. They were nomads, used to moving, but the environment was forcing them to settle, to hunker down. They needed a permanent solution for the winter months. They needed mass. And as they walked the migration routes, tracking the herds, they walked past the skeletons of mammoths that had died of natural causes or been hunted centuries prior. These bones were not decaying. The cold, dry air preserved them. They were like stone, but shaped by biology. The turning point came when a builder, an Einstein of the Ice Age, looked at a mammoth mandible, the lower jaw. A mammoth jaw is V-shaped, heavy, solid bone. If you place it on the ground right side up, it rocks. It's unstable. But if you turn it upside down, resting it on the chin and the two rear condyles, it forms a tripod. It becomes incredibly stable. This was the aha moment. They realized that biology had already done the engineering for them. They didn't need to shape bricks. The animals had grown them. But it wasn't just the jaws. They looked at the skull. A mammoth skull is a honeycomb of bone designed to support heavy tusks and massive chewing muscles. It is heavy, huge, and structurally rigid. The engineering insight was to treat these bones not as random debris, but as standardized building blocks. They realized that by interlocking the chin of one jaw into the gap of the next, they could create a pattern. A herringbone pattern. This wasn't just stacking, this was masonry. They could build a wall that was self-supporting, thick, and wind-resistant. But realizing the potential of the bones was the easy part. The logistics of construction would present a challenge that nearly broke them. To build a single house required the remains of nearly 100 mammoths. This wasn't a hunting trip. This was an industrial salvage operation. They had to locate, transport, and sort over 20 tons of bone across a frozen landscape without wheels, without sled dogs, using only human muscle. The construction process of a site like Mezhyrich is a testament to human organization. It began with the foundation. They didn't dig down, they built up. They selected the largest, heaviest skulls to serve as the base anchors. Imagine the tactile sensation of maneuvering a mammoth skull. It weighs 100 kilograms. The bone is cold, rough, and pitted. You and 3 others are dragging it on a sledge made of hide. Your breath plumes in the air. You position it in a circle, facing inward. Why inward? Because the face of the skull is flat. By facing them inward, they created a smooth interior wall. They packed the gaps between the skulls with earth and smaller bones. Then came the walls. This is where the genius of the design shines. They stacked the mandibles upside down, interlocking them in a zigzag pattern. This pattern, which we see in the archaeological record, served a crucial structural purpose. It distributed the weight. If the ground shifted, which permafrost does when it thaws slightly or freezes deeper, a straight stack of bones would topple. The zigzag pattern allowed the wall to flex. It acted like a spring. They filled the hollow spaces in the bones with loess, packed earth, and moss. This created a composite wall, bone for strength, earth for insulation. It was windproof. It was thick. It had thermal mass. When you ran your hand along the wall, it wouldn't feel like a pile of skeletons. It would feel like a solid, textured fortification. But then, the crisis hits. The walls are up, standing 6 feet high, a circle of white bone against the grey sky. But a wall is not a shelter. You need a roof. And this is where the physics becomes deadly. The span of the house is nearly 20 feet across. You have no timber beams to bridge that gap. If you just throw hides over the top, they will sag in the middle, catch the snow, become impossibly heavy, and rip the walls inward, crushing everyone inside. The wind is picking up. The winter solstice is approaching. You can see the dark clouds banking in the north. You have tons of hides, reindeer skins, stitched together with sinew, but you have no way to support them. You try to use ribs, but they are too curved, too short. You try to use leg bones, but they are straight and slippery. They don't lock together. And here lies the paradox. To make the roof stay on in the wind, it needs to be heavy. But to keep the roof from collapsing the house, it needs to be light. You are trapped between gravity and aerodynamics. If the roof is too light, the suction of the wind, the Bernoulli principle, will lift it off like a parachute. If it's too heavy, the lack of a central pillar will doom it. You need an arch. You need a structure that transfers the vertical weight of the roof outward into the walls rather than straight down. The solution lay in the tusks. The mammoth tusk is a masterpiece of biological engineering. It is ivory, dense, flexible, and incredibly strong in compression. But most importantly, it is curved. The builders realized that if they placed the tusks into the tops of the walls, curving inward and meeting in the center, they could create a rudimentary dome. They created a lattice of tusks. But ivory is smooth. How do you connect two smooth, curved, heavy objects in the freezing cold? They used rawhide lashings applied wet. As the rawhide froze and dried, it shrank, binding the tusks together with thousands of pounds of constrictive force. They created a friction-fit frame. Then came the covering. They layered the hides over the tusk frame. But they didn't just lay them there. They engineered the aerodynamics. They placed antlers, massive branching reindeer antlers, on top of the hides. This looks decorative to the untrained eye, but it was functional. The antlers acted as drag and ballast. They broke up the airflow over the smooth dome of the roof, preventing the formation of the low-pressure lift that would suck the roof off. They interlocked the antlers, creating a heavy, bony net that held the skins down. Finally, they addressed the insulation. They stacked turf and dirt against the outside of the bone walls, creating a berm. The house now looked like a small hillock rising from the plain. It was aerodynamic, wind-deflecting, and insulated by feet of earth and bone. The test of survival comes in the depths of January. The blizzard arrives not with snow, but with ice fog. The temperature drops to -50. The wind speed hits 80 miles per hour. Outside, visibility is 0. A human caught in this for 10 minutes would succumb to exposure. The wind screams over the steppe, tearing at everything in its path. It hits the bone house. Because of the circular shape, the wind flows around the structure. There are no flat corners to create turbulence. The pressure presses the roof down, seating the tusks firmer into the wall sockets. The interlocking mandibles flex slightly, absorbing the vibration, but they do not break. Inside, the contrast is staggering. It is dark, lit only by the amber glow of the central hearth. But what are they burning? There is no wood. They are burning bone. Specifically, green bone or bone dipped in animal fat. Bone fire burns hot and slow. It produces a thick, heavy smoke, but the heat is intense. The smell is pungent, oily, and organic, but it is the smell of life. The thermal mass of the skulls and jaws absorbs the radiant heat from the fire. The walls themselves begin to radiate warmth back into the room. The temperature differential is massive. Outside, -50. Inside, +15 Celsius. A 65-degree difference, maintained by a pile of bones. The result is survival. The archaeological evidence from Mezhyrich shows that these houses were occupied for long periods. They weren't temporary. They were homes. We find sewing needles, musical instruments made of bone, and amber jewelry inside. The data is impressive. A single dwelling might utilize 20 tons of bone. That's 95 mandibles, 40 skulls, and hundreds of long bones. The structural load capacity of the tusk arch system could support feet of snow without buckling. The semi-subterranean floor kept the draft out. But the most crucial success was the psychological one. In a landscape that was entirely open, exposed, and hostile, these people created a sanctuary. They created a space where they could take off their furs, where a grandmother could tell stories to a child, where humanity could do more than just survive. They could develop culture. The bone house was a machine that converted the hostility of the Ice Age into a livable microclimate. The Mammoth bone houses of Ukraine stand as one of the most profound examples of human adaptation in history. When we think of primitive technology, we often think of simple tools. But this was complex civil engineering. They didn't have steel, concrete, or lumber. They looked at a landscape of death and saw the materials for life. They teach us a powerful lesson about nature. Resources are never truly absent. They are just disguised. The wasteland of the steppe was actually a warehouse of building supplies, if you had the eyes to see it and the ingenuity to use it. They didn't fight the lack of wood. They adapted to the abundance of bone. We often worry about our future, about resource scarcity and climate change. But our ancestors faced a climate far worse, with tools far simpler, and they built castles. If you want to discover more forgotten ancient technologies that helped humanity survive, subscribe now and comment below. What type of ancient shelter should we explore next?